My name is Marin Vance, and I'm 32 years old. Last Thursday, I stepped into my parents' dining room, a room that's supposed to smell like home and comfort, and I felt like I had walked into a crime scene. I stood there, paralyzed, as I counted the place settings. 1, 2, 3. 3 plates on a table that was clearly intended for 4. My fiancé, Xavier Reed, is a black man. I am not. And apparently, in my mother's twisted world of etiquette and social standing, that was all the justification she needed to literally erase the man I love from a dinner she had spent the entire afternoon sweating over. My father didn't even have the decency to look him in the eye. He looked at Xavier, then shifted that cold, iron gaze toward me, and spat out 6 words that effectively incinerated 12 months of pure, unadulterated happiness. He said, "This is not happening in my house." He didn't just say it, he declared it, like a judge handing down a death sentence. He wouldn't shake Xavier's hand, didn't even acknowledge the man was standing right in front of him. He wouldn't speak his name, and my mother wouldn't even budge to reach for a 4th plate. But here is the thing that neither of them had a clue about. The man they had just shut out, the man they treated like an invisible intruder, was holding on to a secret about my father. It was a secret that had been gathering dust for 40 years in a county archive, just 3 miles down the road from their pristine front door. Welcome back to Real Reddit Revenge. This is the channel where we take those messy family moments and turn them into the stories that prove karma always finds its way home. If you have ever been the one left sitting at a table where you clearly weren't welcome, this one is for you. Drop a comment with your own stories of family drama, and make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the moment the truth finally comes out. I'm based in Nashville, where I work as a pediatric nurse practitioner at Monroe Carroll Jr. Children's Hospital. It's a high-stakes job, and it's allowed me to build a life I'm proud of. I own a cozy 1-bedroom condo right off Belmont Boulevard, and I handle my own mortgage, my own car payments, and every single utility bill. I've been the one holding the pen for my own life since I was 19 years old. See, my parents decided to cut off my college funding during my sophomore year because I dared to disagree with them. My father was convinced I belonged in pre-law. He wanted a daughter he could brag about at the country club. I wanted nursing. He looked me in the eye and said, "Nurses are the ones who empty bedpans, Marin. Lawyers are the ones who actually change the world." I looked him right back and told him that the world actually needs a lot more clean bedpans. That was the very last tuition check Arthur Vance ever bothered to write. I didn't let that stop me. I transferred into the nursing program at Vanderbilt, signed my life away on student loans, and spent 3 years working the graveyard shift at a Waffle House on Broadway 4 nights a week. I'd walk into my 8 a.m. lectures smelling like hash browns, grease, and cheap coffee, but I did what I had to do. I graduated with a 3.7 GPA and passed my boards on the very first attempt. By the time I hit 30, I had paid off every cent of my $62K in student debt. I learned how to piece a life together the way you learn how to suture a deep wound, one careful, intentional stitch at a time. Slow, steady, and absolutely no wasted thread. At the hospital, I'm the person parents look to when their world is crumbling. I'm the one who stays steady as a rock when a 3-year-old's oxygen levels start dropping. I'm the one who can explain a terrifying diagnosis without making it feel like the end of the world. But the second I step back into the shadow of my parents, all that professional authority just vanishes. Around Arthur and Alina Vance, I'm still just that rebellious girl who chose the wrong major, the daughter who never visits enough, and the sister who apparently goes out of her way to make everything more complicated than it needs to be. I'm a 32-year-old woman, and I still have to mentally rehearse my phone calls to my mother like I'm prepping for a high-conflict family conference in the NICU. My colleague Dana once asked me why I get so silent and focused right before I dial home. I told her it's exactly like a pre-op checklist. You have to go through every item, you have to anticipate every possible complication, and you have to be ready to manage the bleeding before anyone else in the room even realizes there's a problem. She laughed and thought I was being a bit dramatic. I wasn't joking. And then I met Xavier. We met at a Habitat for Humanity build in East Nashville on a crisp September day. The air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut sawdust and somebody's pulled pork simmering in a crock pot on a folding table nearby. Xavier was leading the structural team, looking like he was born for the job, while I was running the first aid station, basically just a card table stocked with Band-Aids, sunscreen, and a cooler full of Gatorade. He came over around noon with a nasty splinter in his thumb. As I pulled it out with my tweezers, he thanked me twice. I said, "You're welcome," once, and he stood there for a beat longer than a splinter removal actually requires. Xavier Reed is 34, and he's a brilliant structural engineer at a top-tier firm downtown. He spends his days designing the bridges and overpasses that thousands of people drive over every single day without ever wondering if they'll hold up. He's the person who makes sure they hold. He's originally from Memphis, raised by his mother, Lorraine, a school librarian who just retired after 31 years of service, and his grandmother, Catherine Reed. Catherine was a home health aide who spent 3 decades of her life caring for families in a small, tucked-away Tennessee town called Millbrook. Everything about Xavier was solid, load-bearing. He's the kind of man who measures twice before he ever speaks a single word. We dated for 8 months, and he proposed on a random Tuesday morning. There was no fancy restaurant, no hidden ring box and a chocolate lava cake. He simply set the ring on the kitchen counter right next to my coffee while I was busy scrolling through lab results on my laptop. I looked up, and he just said, "Whenever you're ready." I told him I'd been ready since the day I pulled that splinter out. The ring was a simple, elegant band with a small, perfect stone. He picked it out himself, refusing to listen to a jeweler's sales pitch. He said he chose it because it was built to last, not to impress. I loved that about him. He understood the difference between value and vanity. A few weeks after the proposal, Xavier mentioned his grandmother, Catherine, again. She had passed away when he was 16, but he talked about her time working in Millbrook. I nodded along, but I didn't connect the dots. Not yet. Millbrook, Tennessee, is a town of 4,200 people. It has 4 churches, 2 gas stations, and 1 barbershop that hasn't changed its haircutting style since 1957. Everybody knows everybody else's business, and if they don't know the truth, they'll just make up something that sounds believable. My father, Arthur Vance, is 61. He's a retired shop foreman from the auto parts plant on Route 7. He spent 34 years on that floor, and he runs his household exactly the way he ran his shift, strictly on schedule, at a high volume, and with absolutely no questions asked. You clock in, you follow the manual, and you do not talk back. My mother, Alina, is 58, a professional homemaker and the head of every committee at First Baptist Millbrook. She handles the potlucks, the bake sales, and the annual Easter brunch for 22 people without a single side dish ever being late. She's never missed a Sunday service, and she's never raised her voice in her life. But she's also never once said no to me directly. My mother doesn't refuse you, she just removes your options. A plate, a chair, an invitation that just happens to never show up. She manages conflict the way a surgeon manages a bleed. Quietly, precisely, and long before you even realize what you've lost. The dining table is a heavy oak 6-seater that's been in the Vance family since my grandfather's era. It's where every birthday is celebrated, where every argument is settled, and where my father once looked at me and my older sister, Cassie, and told us that girls who talk too much at dinner are going to have a real hard time finding husbands. I was 9 years old. Cassie was 12. Neither of us said a single word for the rest of that meal. That table is the place where Vance family decisions are etched in stone. My sister Cassie is 35 now. She's a local real estate agent. Married to a guy named Hunter, and she's got 2 kids. On Facebook, she posts all kinds of progressive, open-minded stuff. But in person, she defers to Arthur on every single thing. I hadn't explicitly told my parents that Xavier is black. I called my mom on a Wednesday and told her I was bringing my fiancé home for dinner that Saturday. She sounded absolutely delighted. She wanted all the details, what he did for a living, where he grew up, if he was a good Christian man. I gave her the facts. Engineer, Memphis, yes. She never asked what he looked like, and I didn't say it. The words were right there on the tip of my tongue, but I just couldn't push them past my teeth. I told myself it shouldn't matter. I convinced myself that when they saw Xavier, they'd see what I see, a steady, kind, and brilliant man. Xavier wasn't naive about the situation, though. He'd lived in the real world a lot longer than I'd lived in my bubble. He told me, "Marin, I've been the first black man at a lot of dinner tables. I know exactly what that looks like. I brushed it off and told him this was different because they were my parents. He paused, the kind of long, heavy pause that holds an entire argument he was choosing not to have. That evening, as I was packing, I saw Xavier sitting on the edge of the bed. He had his wallet open, and he was staring at a creased, old black-and-white photograph of a woman with a stunning smile standing on a wooden porch. He carried that photo the way some men carry a religious medal, not for show, but to keep himself grounded. I'd asked him about it once before. He told me it was his grandmother, Catherine, and that she was the reason he was the man he is today. Then he got very quiet and asked, "Your last name is Vance, and you're from Millbrook, right?" I nodded. Xavier didn't look at me as he started folding a shirt. My grandmother used to work in Millbrook for about 30 years. She was a home health aide. She took care of a family named Vance, specifically a little boy whose mother wasn't able to care for him. I actually laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was that nervous kind of chuckle you use to shut down a conversation you aren't ready to have. I told him that Millbrook has at least 6 Vance families and that half the town is related to us. I told him, "That's not us." Xavier didn't push it. He just tucked that photo back into his wallet with the kind of care you use for something irreplaceable. I should have paid more attention to the way his jaw tightened when I said that. I should have noticed the weight in his voice, but I was too busy rehearsing my mental script. "Dad, this is Xavier. He builds bridges. Mom, he loves your pot roast." I'd even coached him on the pot roast because my mother measures her worth in food-related compliments. My whole plan was introduce, impress, and survive. I didn't have a plan for 3 plates. Nobody ever plans for 3 plates. The drive from Nashville to Millbrook takes about 3 hours if you don't stop. We only stopped once, at a dusty gas station outside of Cookville, where Xavier bought 2 waters and a pack of gum. He offered me a piece, and I took 2 just to have something to do with my mouth. We passed the "Welcome to Millbrook" sign at exactly 4:17 in the afternoon. Population 4,200. Established 1847. The sign hadn't changed since I was a kid. It felt like the town itself was stuck in a loop. Xavier's hand on the gear shift was rock steady, while mine were buried in my lap, shredding an old receipt. I called Cassie when we were 20 minutes out. She told me Mom made the pot roast, but that Dad was in a mood. We had a shorthand for Arthur's moods, categorized like hurricanes. Category 1 is silent disapproval. Category 2 is the pointed jabs. Category 3 is the shouting. Category 4, we don't even talk about Category 4. The last time it happened was when Cassie married Hunter, who had dropped out of college twice. My dad eventually came around, but only because Hunter was white. Xavier didn't have that advantage. We pulled into the gravel driveway at 4:36 p.m. My father's blue Ford F-150 was parked there like a sentry guarding the house. I saw the curtain move in the living room. Someone was watching. And that's when I saw it through the dining room window, the 3-place settings. 3 plates, 3 sets of silver, all catching the overhead light. I counted them before we even unbuckled our seatbelts. The front door swung open before we even hit the porch steps. My mother stood there in her Sunday apron, smiling that practiced, perfect smile she uses for the pastor. But the moment she saw Xavier, that smile didn't break. It just turned cold. She stepped aside, not like a host welcoming a guest, but like someone making room for a piece of furniture they didn't order. Then Arthur appeared. He filled the hallway, chest out, chin up, looking like a man who had never once doubted his own authority. He looked at Xavier. He looked at me. And then he dropped that deadbolt of a sentence. "This is not happening in my house." 6 words to erase my life. He said it the way he used to call out reject codes at the factory. No appeal, no discussion. Xavier tried to be the bigger man. He extended his hand and introduced himself. My father looked at that hand like it was something disgusting that had landed on his dinner, turned his back, and walked away. My mother tried to fill the silence with her usual chatter, acting like everything was normal while Cassie stared at her phone in the kitchen. I stood there, watching the man I love being treated like a ghost. If you've ever seen your family choose their own prejudice over your happiness, you know that hollow feeling in your chest. The dining room was a museum of passive aggression. The ivory linen was ironed to a crisp. The gold-rimmed good china was out, and there were only 3. "Mom, you're missing a plate," I said, my voice shaking. She didn't even look at the table. She just said she must have miscounted, but she didn't move an inch to fix it. She just sat down. My dad was already at the head of the table. Cassie took her seat. 3 plates, 3 people, 1 missing human being. I walked into the kitchen, opened the cabinet I'd known my whole life, and grabbed a plain, cheap white plate, the kind we use for leftovers. I brought it out and slammed it down at the 4th chair. It looked hideous next to the gold-rimmed china, like a stain on a white dress. Xavier waited for me to sit, then he took his seat. He didn't complain. He didn't mention the blatant insult of the mismatched plate. He just unfolded his napkin and politely thanked my mother for the meal. The pot roast sat in the center of the table, looking perfect and smelling like a lie. My father started talking to me as if Xavier were just a part of the wallpaper. "So, Marin, how's work at the hospital?" I put my fork down and looked him in the eye. "Work is fine, Dad, and Xavier is a structural engineer. He builds bridges." My father didn't even pause. I didn't ask about him. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It crawled across the table and suffocated the room. My mother, true to form, tried to bury it under a mountain of useless gossip. The pastor's wife, the bake sale, the neighbors. She poured words into the room like someone pouring gravel into a massive sinkhole, hoping it would make the surface look solid again. And through it all, Xavier just sat there, eating quietly, waiting for the moment he would finally open his mouth and change our family's history forever. Xavier didn't miss a beat. He took a bite of the food and looked right at my mother. "Mrs. Vance, this pot roast is incredible. It actually reminds me exactly of how my grandmother used to make it. Same rosemary hit, same low and slow cook." Eleanor's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She hovered there for a second, then 2, before her church lady mask slid back into place. "How lovely," she managed to squeeze out. I looked over at Arthur. His hand tightened on his steak knife until his knuckles turned white. It was a small detail, the kind of knuckle tension you only notice if you spent your entire childhood reading your father's hands like a weather vane to predict an incoming storm. Cassie's phone buzzed on the table. She stared at the screen but didn't dare look up. I sat there, looking at the gold-rimmed wedding china to my left and the plain, mismatched plate in front of my fiancé, and it hit me. I had been eating off the wrong plate my entire life. Arthur finally looked at Xavier, really looked at him, the way a factory foreman inspects a piece of equipment he's about to toss into the scrap bin. "So, where are you from exactly?" "Memphis, sir, born and raised." "And your people, what do they do for a living?" Xavier set his fork down. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was the way a professional sets down a tool when he's about to use his hands. "My mother was a school librarian for over 30 years, retired last June. And my grandmother was a home health aide. She spent her entire career taking care of families who couldn't handle things on their own." Arthur's jaw shifted maybe a millimeter, but I've been reading that jaw for 32 years like a seismologist watching a needle. Every tremor means a quake is coming. "And you think you're qualified to take care of my daughter?" Xavier let out a controlled pause, the kind that carries so much weight it makes everyone lean in. "I don't think I can take care of your daughter, sir. Your daughter has been taking care of herself since she was 19 years old. I'm just the man she's chosen to walk beside." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the wooden clock on the wall, the one shaped like Tennessee, ticking twice. Eleanor dabbed her mouth with her napkin, her voice trembling slightly. "Well, that's certainly modern." Arthur pushed his chair back just 3 inches. Not enough to stand up, but enough to draw a line in the sand. "Modern," he repeated, saying the word like it was a contagious disease he'd read about but prayed he'd never catch. Xavier just picked up his fork and kept eating. He was eating Catherine's recipe in the very house of the man Catherine had raised. After dinner, I caught Cassie in the kitchen. She was loading the dishwasher with the intensity of a surgeon, doing anything to avoid eye contact. "Cassie," I whispered, "say something, anything." "About what, Marin?" "About the fact that our father just treated my fiancé like a trespasser. About the 3 plates. About the blatant disrespect." She slammed a plate into the rack, aligning it with obsessive precision. "Marin, it's complicated." "It's not complicated at all. Dad was a straight-up racist to Xavier. Mom backed him up with the silverware, and you just sat there like a statue." She turned off the water and dried her hands on a kitchen towel, the one with the roosters that's been hanging there since 2014. "I have kids, Marin. I have to think about the holidays. I have to think about Hunter's business. Dad refers a massive amount of clients to him. I can't just blow up my life. I stared at her. This was the same woman who posted a black square on Instagram in 2020 and shared "How to be an ally" articles all over Facebook. So what you're saying is, your silence has a price tag. I'm saying it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, Cassie. It's the exact cost of Hunter's quarterly referral checks from Arthur Vance. She didn't have an answer. She just hit the start button on the dishwasher, letting the machine's hum fill the void she wasn't brave enough to bridge herself. I walked into the living room and found Xavier standing by the fireplace mantel. He was looking at the rows of framed photos, the school portraits, Cassie's wedding, the 3rd anniversary shots, a whole gallery of a family that documented everything except the truth. He was focused on one small 5x7 frame pushed all the way to the back, half hidden behind a church picnic photo. It was an old brass frame, tarnished and cheap, the kind you'd find in a bargain bin decades ago. In the photo, there was a little boy, maybe 4 or 5, white, laughing hysterically while being held on the hip of a black woman standing on a wooden porch. Her smile was massive, the kind that uses every muscle in the face. The boy was gripping her collar with the absolute trust of a child holding onto their entire world. "Marin, come look at this," Xavier said. I stood beside him and looked. The boy was unmistakable. That same stubborn jaw, the same set of the mouth. "That's Dad," I whispered. "It has to be. 1986, maybe 69. I tilted the frame. "But who is the woman?" Xavier didn't answer. Suddenly, Alina appeared in the doorway. "What are you two looking at?" Her voice was a fraction too casual, the tone she uses when she's already planning how to bury a problem. She saw the photo and something flickered across her face. It wasn't surprise, it was something older. Guilt. "That's just an old relic," she said, walking over. "I don't even know why it's still out." She reached out, took the frame, and laid it face down on the mantel. Carefully, like she was closing a book she never wanted anyone to read again. "Let me get you both some coffee," she added, practically fleeing the room. Xavier looked at the hidden frame, then at me. My mother knew exactly who that woman was, and she had just tried to bury her for the 2nd time in 40 years. The guest room hadn't changed since I left for college. Same quilt, same Bible on the nightstand, and the same window overlooking the garden where Arthur grows tomatoes he's too stingy to share with the neighbors. Xavier sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out that creased photo from his wallet, the one of his grandmother, Catherine. He held it under the lamp. "That's my grandmother, Marin, and the boy in that photo on the mantel, that's your father." I sat down next to him, my head spinning. I looked at the photo. Same white porch railing, same crooked post, same afternoon light, same woman, same life-changing smile. "Catherine Reed took care of your father for 3 years, Xavier said quietly. "She changed his clothes, fed him every meal, and walked him to Millbrook Elementary every morning. His mother, your grandmother, was in the state hospital with severe depression. She couldn't function." "No," I shook my head. "Dad would have told us. He would have said something." "Would he?" The question hung in the air like a heavy piece of furniture no one wanted to move. My father was raised by a black woman. For 3 years, the most important person in his life was a woman who looked like Xavier's family. And yet, he just refused to shake Xavier's hand at his own front door. The weight of 40 years of silence filled that room like a thick, cold fog. Xavier pulled up his phone. He'd been ready for this in a way I wasn't. He showed me a bookmarked page. The County Home Health Aid Registry, digitized in 2019. Catherine Reed, license active 1964-1993. Assigned client, Arthur Vance, minor, Millbrook, TN. Dates, Sept 1967, Aug 1970. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a cold, hard government record. A county seal at the top, Arthur's name in one column, Catherine in the next. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. "I tried, Marin. You're the one who told me there were 6 Vance families in town and that it couldn't be you." He was right. I dismissed it because it was easier to believe in a coincidence than to face the truth about my father's hypocrisy. I spent 32 years in this family, and the biggest truth about our history was sitting in an archive 3 miles away while my father pretended it never happened. I didn't sleep a wink. I lay in the dark listening to the house groan, feeling the shift in the foundation. Sunday morning, I went downstairs at 7:15. Arthur was at the table with his coffee and the Millbrook Courier, a paper that's mostly just obituaries and cattle prices. He didn't even look up. I was invisible to him. Alina was at the stove making eggs and bacon. There were 4 plates this time, but she had placed Xavier's plate at the very end of the table, past an empty chair. Even when she included him, she found a way to segregate him. Xavier came down at 7:30, looking calm and collected. He saw the table layout and reacted like an engineer seeing a structural flaw. Without saying a word, he picked up his plate, his silver and his glass, and moved them right next to mine. One smooth, silent motion. Arthur's newspaper rustled. Alina's spatula stopped mid-scrape. Cassie walked in, saw the new seating arrangement, and immediately looked at the floor as she sat down. Nobody said a word, but everyone felt the impact. "Good morning," Xavier said pleasantly. Arthur just flipped the page. I grabbed Xavier's hand under the table. His grip was warm and steady, load-bearing. After breakfast, Alina cornered me in the laundry room while the men were in the garage. "Honey," she said in that weaponized, soft voice she uses to manipulate me, "I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm just saying, think about the children." "What about them, Mom?" "They won't belong anywhere, Marin. Not with his people, not with ours. I'm just thinking about their future. Somebody has to." I dropped the towel I was folding. "No, Mom. You're thinking about what the ladies at the First Baptist Committee are going to whisper behind your back." The tears started in under 3 seconds. My mother's tears are like a smoke alarm, loud, piercing, and designed to make everyone stop what they're doing to fix her. "Why do you always make me the villain?" "I only want what's best for you." It was the same old routine, like when she forced me into pageants or when she rearranged my dorm room without asking. Her love was a room with no exits, perfectly decorated but impossible to leave. I almost caved. My good daughter programming told me to hug her and apologize, but I stopped. I pulled my hands back. My mother just told me my future children wouldn't belong in her world. If you've ever been told your love isn't correct, or if you were that kid who didn't fit in, type, "I belong" in the comments right now. Because belonging isn't a gift your family gives you, it's something you claim. Arthur and Alina went to church. Xavier and I stayed behind. It was the first time in my life I'd ever skipped Sunday service while staying under their roof. When they got back, the house filled with the fake noise of normalcy, kids running, Hunter talking about football. Arthur found me in the garage by his workbench. Every tool was in its place, with a black marker outline on the pegboard so he'd know if even a screwdriver was missing. "You want to throw your life away? Do it somewhere else," he growled. This was category 3, flat, dangerous, and loud. "But you aren't bringing that into this family." "His name is Xavier, Dad." "I don't care what his name is." I looked at my father, this man whose hands had fixed my toys and held me on his shoulders, but who now refused to shake the hand of the man I love. "You should care about his name, Dad, because his grandmother cared a whole lot about yours." Arthur froze. For a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes, the kind of fear you see in a patient when they realize the diagnosis is terminal. Then he shut it down. "I don't know what you're talking about, and if that boy is putting stories in your head, that's exactly why he's not welcome here." He pushed past me and stormed into the house. I found Xavier in the guest room, packing methodically. "You were right," I said, "about everything." "I didn't want to be right, Marin." "We're having one last talk with them," I said, sitting on the bed. "Not to argue, but to tell the truth. About Catherine. About the plates. About the fact that Mom's been passing off a black woman's recipe as her own for 30 years, while Dad pretends the woman who raised him never existed." Xavier looked at me. "That's a lot of truth for one room." "This house has been fueled by lies for 60 years. It can handle one afternoon of honesty. And if they can't take it, they can watch us drive away. And I won't be coming back until they're ready to be real." He gave me that slow, weighted nod. It was a plan that met his structural standards. I called Cassie. "Be at Mom's at 5:00. Everyone, I need you there." "Marin, I don't think." 5 Cassie. I hung up. I was done rehearsing. At 5, the living room was bathed in that golden Tennessee light that makes everything look better than it actually is. Arthur was in his leather armchair, his throne. Alina was on the sofa in her church posture, ready to survive whatever was coming with dignity. Cassie was perched on the edge of a chair, looking like she wanted to bolt. Hunter was outside in the truck with the kids. Xavier and I stood. We didn't sit. This wasn't a chat, it was a declaration. "I called you all here because things need to be said," I started, my voice rock steady, "and I want witnesses." Arthur leaned back, scoffing. "This is melodramatic, Marin." "No, Dad. Melodramatic was refusing to shake a man's hand because of his skin color. This is just overdue." I looked at the mantel. The photo frame was still face down, a hidden face in a room full of people who desperately needed to see it. Cassie shifted uncomfortably, and I knew there was no turning back now. "Arthur, can we just—" My mother started, her voice trembling with that familiar, desperate plea to sweep everything back under the rug. "No," I cut her off, turning my gaze toward her. I didn't raise my voice, but I let it carry the weight of 32 years of frustration. "We cannot just— that is the motto of this family, isn't it? We just ignore it. We just move on. We just pretend. And look what it's cost us. We've lost things we should be absolutely ashamed of losing." The living room went vacuum-sealed quiet. I turned to my mother first, the woman who had curated my reality since birth. "Mom, when we walked in here Thursday night, you set 3 plates. You told me you miscounted." "But we both know that's a lie. I'm a nurse, Mom. I've spent my career delivering news that people don't want to hear, calmly, clearly, and without leaving any room for ambiguity. So let's be clear now, you didn't miscount. You chose. You set 3 gold-rimmed plates from your 1988 wedding set, the good china, and you left out a 4th. You made that decision before we even pulled into the driveway." Alina's lips pressed into a thin, white line. She looked like she was trying to physically hold her composure together. "And yesterday morning," I continued, stepping closer. "You set 4 plates, sure, but you placed Xavier's at the very edge of the table, past an empty chair, like he was a footnote in a story you didn't want to read. You've never miscounted a single thing in your life, Alina. You planned Thanksgiving for 22 people with military precision. You organized church potlucks down to the hex code of the tablecloths and the exact placement of the serving spoons. You do not miscount." On cue, her eyes filled with tears. It was a scheduled performance, the same tears that had ended every difficult conversation in the Vance household since the late 80s. "You don't understand the position you're putting me in, Marin," she sobbed. "I understand it perfectly," I snapped. "The position is this: your daughter chose love, and because it wasn't the version you pre-approved, you tried to erase it. You say you're protecting me, but you're actually just protecting the curated image you present at Sunday service. And the cost of that image is an empty seat at your own table." She sank back into the sofa, the tears flowing freely now. But these weren't her usual tactical tears, the ones meant to guilt-trip me into silence. These were the tears of a woman who had just seen a brutally honest portrait of herself and realized she hated the person in the frame. "You didn't miscount, Mom," I said, letting the words land like a final diagnosis. "You chose." I turned my attention to my father. Arthur was sitting with his arms tightly crossed, his foreman's posture. It was the look that signaled the meeting was over and his word was final. "Dad, you said this wasn't happening in your house, so I have a question for you. Who is the woman in that photograph? The one Mom just tried to hide." "I have no idea what you're talking about," he growled. I walked over to the mantel. My footsteps were muffled by the plush carpet, but the silence following me was deafening. I picked up the brass frame, turned it face up, and held it out so the entire room had to look. A 5-year-old white boy, laughing his head off, held on the hip of a black woman with a smile so bright it radiated off the paper. "This is you, Dad. You're about 5 years old on a porch being held by this woman. Who is she?" Arthur's arms uncrossed, then snapped back together. "Put that down, Marin, now." "Who is she, Dad?" "Marin, please," Alina cried out. "This isn't the time." Cassie leaned forward, her eyes locked on the photo. "I've never seen that picture in my life." "Put it down." Arthur's voice dropped an octave. It was Category 3, spiraling fast toward a Category 4 storm. I didn't flinch. My hands, the same hands that can find a vein in a screaming 3-year-old without a single tremor, were rock steady. Xavier stepped forward then. He moved with a quiet authority, the way an engineer approaches a load-bearing wall that's about to give way. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, and extracted that creased black-and-white photo, the one that had traveled from Memphis to Millbrook in the pocket of a man my father wouldn't even shake hands with. He held it right next to the frame in my hand. It was an undeniable match. Same porch, same crooked railing, same woman. In the frame, a young Arthur Vance was gripping her collar for dear life. In Xavier's photo, the woman stood alone, younger, wearing a simple cotton dress and shoes meant for a long day of work. "Her name was Catherine Reed, Mr. Vance," Xavier said. His voice was calm, not accusatory. He was just delivering a fact, and he didn't need volume to make it devastating. "She was a home health aide in this town for 30 years. She was assigned to your family in 1967 when your mother was admitted to the state hospital. You were 4 years old." Arthur didn't move. He didn't even blink. His face turned the exact color of the ivory tablecloth in the dining room. "She fed you breakfast every single morning," Xavier continued. "She walked you to Millbrook Elementary. She read to you every night for 3 years. 3 years, Arthur." The room was so quiet I could actually hear the clock on the mantel, a clock I didn't even know worked, ticking away behind the photos. Cassie whispered, "Dad!" But he said nothing. Eleanor's hand flew to her throat, that universal gesture of someone trying to choke back a truth they've been hiding for a lifetime. Xavier closed his wallet and tucked it away. He had said his piece. Almost. He looked at Arthur, the man who had refused his handshake, the man who claimed Xavier didn't belong in his house, the man who, as a lonely 4-year-old, had clung to a black woman as his only source of safety. "Catherine Reed was my grandmother, Mr. Vance," Xavier said, letting the words breathe. "She raised you with the same patience and grace she used to raise me, and she did it with a pot roast recipe that I'm guessing your wife is still using to this day." The pot roast. The legendary Eleanor Vance pot roast that had been the cornerstone of every church, social, and funeral reception in Millbrook for 35 years. The recipe Eleanor had claimed as her own family secret since 1991. It was Catherine's. Arthur's eyes shifted to his wife. Eleanor looked at the floor, her hands shaking with an involuntary tremor, the kind that only comes when you've been caught in a decades-long lie. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was geological. It felt like the very earth beneath the house was shifting. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My father, the man who always had the last word, the man who ruled his home like a shop floor, was utterly speechless. Cassie covered her mouth with her hand, looking at our father like he was a total stranger. I set the frame back on the mantel, upright and face up, where it belonged. Catherine Reed smiled out at the living room she had once cleaned, in the house she had once practically run, for the boy she had once loved. And that boy sat in his expensive leather chair, unable to find a single syllable to defend himself. I stood in front of them both. "Dad, the woman who raised you, who held you when your own mother couldn't, she was black. She was Xavier's grandmother, and you just refused to shake her grandson's hand." I turned to Eleanor. "And Mom, you've used her recipe to win awards and impress neighbors for 30 years. You've built your perfect reputation on her work, and then you set 3 plates for her grandson." Eleanor pressed a napkin to her eyes, but the act was over. The curtain had fallen, and the audience could see the stage was empty. "We're leaving tonight," I declared. "Xavier and I are headed back to Nashville, and I want you both to hear me. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm not abandoning the family. I am simply choosing the man whose grandmother had enough love to raise someone else's child, even when that child's family would never have done the same for hers." I looked over at Cassie. She was still frozen on the edge of the seat. "And Cassie, tell Hunter he can come inside now. The show's over." She couldn't even meet my eyes. I looked back at my parents one last time. "When you're ready to set 4 real plates, same china, same table, no footnotes, You have my number." Alina stood up then. Her face hardened into something I'd never seen, the face beneath the church smile. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed, her voice cracking. "After everything I've done, I've kept this family together. I managed your father's moods. I smoothed over every rough edge." "You managed the image, Mom, not the family. There's a difference." "You're tearing us apart," she screamed. I kept my hands at my sides. I stayed at room temperature. "No, Mom. This family tore itself apart the second you decided someone didn't deserve a plate. I'm just the first person honest enough to say it out loud." Diane collapsed back into her seat. Arthur still hadn't moved. He was staring at the photo of his younger self in Catherine's arms. I looked at my mother's hands, the hands that braided my hair and held me during storms. I realized then that the mother and the monster can live in the same body. You don't stop loving them, but you have to stop letting their prejudice be the foundation of your life. Xavier and I walked to the door. Our bags were already there. He'd anticipated the load of this conversation and had the exit strategy ready. At the door, Xavier turned back. He looked at Arthur, who looked smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. "Mr. Vance," Xavier said gently, "my grandmother never spoke a bad word about you, not once. She said you were a sweet boy who deserved better than what life gave you. She was right about the boy. I really hope you can still prove her right about the man." Arthur's eyes were wet, but he didn't nod. He just sat there. We walked out, and the screen door clicked shut with that classic Millbrook sound, a whine and a snap. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back through the dining room window. My mother was standing by the table, staring down at the place settings. 3 gold-rimmed plates, 1 mismatched everyday plate, and a pot roast going cold, a dish that had carried Catherine Reed's legacy for 35 years without ever carrying her name. The drive back to Nashville was 3 hours of pure silence. No music, no podcasts, just the road and the hum of the engine. Halfway home, Xavier called his mom, Lorraine, on speakerphone. He told her everything. The plates, the photo, the confrontation. Lorraine was quiet for a long beat. "Xavier, your grandmother would be so proud of you tonight." Then she said to me, "And Marin, honey, Catherine used to say that the measure of a person isn't who raised them, it's who they choose to become." I finally broke. I'd been a rock through the dinner, the garage, and the living room, but that one sentence from a woman I'd never met shattered the dam. Lorraine understood more about my family in 1 phone call than my mother had in 32 years. We got home at 10:47 p.m., our condo, our piece. Xavier made some chamomile tea, and we sat at our IKEA kitchen table, the one we built together. It seats 4. I opened the cabinet and looked at our plates. 4 matching white plates. No hierarchy, no gold rims, just a place for everyone. It's been 2 months since that night. Arthur hasn't called or texted, not a word in 61 days. Alina has called twice, but she only talks about Cassie's kids or the weather. She's never said the word sorry. She's never mentioned Xavier. She's acting like the dinner never happened. Cassie texted once to say she was sorry she didn't speak up. I told her that sorry without change is just a notification. She hasn't replied since. At the hospital, I'm still the steady one. The medical world doesn't care about my family drama. Parents still need me to be their still point in the room. And at home, Xavier and I are planning our wedding. It'll be small. Lorraine will be there. His cousin Janelle is doing the flowers. There are no Vance names on the guest list. But last Thursday, I got a letter. No return address, just a Millbrook postmark. Inside was a single, handwritten recipe card. Ivory cardstock, blue ink. It was Catherine Reed's pot roast recipe, written out in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. No note, no apology, no "I love you." My mother still can't say the words, but she copied that recipe by hand and mailed it to the daughter she tried to subtract from her life. For now, that's the loudest thing Alina Vance has ever said. I used to think love was about keeping everyone comfortable and smoothing the edges. Now I know that love is about making sure your table is set right. 4 plates, all the same, no separation, even when the people who raised you are still learning how to count. That's my story. 3 plates, 1 secret, and a whole lot of silence. If this story reminded you that you deserve a seat at every table in your life, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe to Real Reddit Revenge, and I'll see you in the next one.